welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where I go through my records in alphabetical order, usually like a big nerd, and talk about why I love them. I say usually because we're up to the letter G, but today is a Revolver week, so we will be sitting firmly within the realm of the Beatles today. Glory be! Today we're going to be covering what I think might be the most beautiful Beatles love song. Lofty claim, yes, but I'm going to do my best to explain why. The song is track 5, side 1 of Revolver. It is, of course, Here, There and Everywhere. This is a song that Paul McCartney, who penned the song, George Martin, who produced the song, and John Lennon, Paul McCartney's soulmate, all cited as one of their all-time favorite Beatles songs, which is pretty incredible given the very high caliber of their 380 to 400 song back catalog. So basically, if you don't trust my lofty claims, you can definitely stand to trust their lofty claims. John Lennon is rarely complimentary about any songs, including his own, and yet he was consistently effusive about the track that we're going to be listening to today. Wasn't he Storytime correspondent?
Yes, indeed. We will be taking today's reading from The Good Book. In his 1980 Playboy interview, he said, "Here, There and Everywhere was Paul's song completely, I believe, and one of my favorite songs of the Beatles." And Paul remembers, from when they were filming Help in Austria, we were playing a cassette of our new recordings and my song Here, There and Everywhere was on. And I remember John saying, "You know, I probably like that better than any of my songs on the tape." Coming from John, that was high praise indeed. Back to you.
We're going to break down why this is such a high-quality, beautiful piece of music by zeroing in on sort of three main components. The way the song was composed, the way that the lyrics are kind of gently brilliant, and the song's arrangement. Let's start with the composition of this track. Some of the Beatles songs are spectacular because they are innovative. Take, for example, A Day in the Life with its orchestral screaming climax. Is not a phrase that I thought I'd be using, but here we are. Or even the song that we looked at in the last Revolver episode, Love You To, which was radical at the time that it came out because it was so culturally different from anything else on a pop record. I think putting the two side by side on this record really highlights the way that this song is beautiful because Paul McCartney is drawing from classic songwriting techniques and making it his own. So what do I mean by classic songwriting techniques? In order to dig deeper into this, I think we're going to have to travel a ways back in time. Here we go. Let's meet Paul's father, Jim. Much like Paul, Jim was a self-taught musician, and he was eventually a band leader. He led Jim Mack's jazz band, and they played what we would probably now refer to as jazz standards or the jazz songbook. Songs like this.
Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town.
Because of that, Paul McCartney had a very musical upbringing. He grew up around music. Like, his family would have these huge New Year's shindigs where everyone would get together and sing, which sounds delightful. I would love a New Year's party like that. Paul talks in interviews about like songs that his dad used to sing and how he would pick them out on guitar and like play them sort of idly when he was in the Beatles and they had downtime. There was just music in his household. A lot of that music was these old standards. When I listen to a lot of Paul McCartney, I think echoes of that music really strongly come through. You hear it especially on songs like When I'm 64. Or Honey Pie.
Honey pie.
Not to be mistaken with Wild Honey Pie. Honey pie. And of course, Here, There and Everywhere. I'm going to indulge in a little bragging here and I hope that you'll allow it, but I listened to the song, I made a couple of notes, I really felt like I could hear a number of different songbook standards coming through with this song and the way that he's put it together. And I was very gratified to find out that about 10 years ago, he put out an album which included a lot of those songs that was basically a tribute to the music that he grew up with and that he had around the house when he was a child.
Even though we were working in a kind of rock and roll style, the
melodic structure of some of those old songs was still there in the back of our minds, both John and I, because he too was keen on this kind of music from his youth.
So I'm just gonna pat myself on the back a little bit over that one. That's enough of that. On with the show. Here, I'm gonna outline some of those songwriting techniques. The first thing is that this song has an introduction that is separate from the rest of the song. It's this bit here. Boy, that's beautiful. That's a convention that used to show up in a lot of older songs.
A lot of old songs had a little appendage on the front. You just, I was in Manhattan, I had nothing to do. Then it goes into the song you know. You go, oh, I know that one. I get a kick out of you. But there's this mysterious period before you go, what the is this, you know?
An example from that album of his from 10 years ago might be the jazz standard Bye Bye Blackbird, which begins like this.
Blackbird, blackbird, singing the blues all day.
But the actual song sounds like this.
Back up all my cares and woe.
Another thing is that this song has a little bit of the jazz influence that a lot of traditional pop music would have had when Paul was a young kid, because these big pop stars like the Rat Pack were incorporating all of these like jazz elements into their popular songs. For example, this song has a sort of A-B structure where there's a main section and then there's a secondary section. This is the main section. And the B section would be this.
I want her everywhere, and if she's beside me, I know I need never care.
That's not how traditional rock and roll is structured, where you might have a verse, a chorus, a solo section, a middle eight. You're gonna end on the chorus. We all know that structure. I saw her standing there.
Well, we danced through a night, and we held each other's side.
Or All My Loving.
All my loving, I will sing to you.
Can't Buy Me Love. They have some variation on that structure. This song doesn't have a clear chorus. It doesn't really have a middle eight. It's just this A section and this B section, and they're alternating throughout the piece. It's also got these very tidy little things at the end of each of the sections, which are called turnarounds. And they're designed to sort of take us as the listener from one section of the song into the next without it feeling jarring. If it's done well, it's immensely satisfying. For example, going from the A section into the B section, Paul does this.
I want her
Do you see how the song sort of changes its mood? But it doesn't sort of shove us into it, it sort of picks us up and lifts us into it. Show us what that means, piano correspondent, please and thank you.
Hello. So as we come out of the A part, each one believing that love never dies, watching her eyes and hoping I'm always. Paul uses these chords to get into the B part. Boom! Totally different feel. He could just go from here, I want her everywhere, but he gives us this little, this chord here, just tidies things up a little bit, and has that, I believe it's called a 5-1 change, because without getting too technical, we've now moved into B flat, and the fifth note of the B flat major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, F. In Western music, the fifth chord to the first chord is like one of the most ubiquitous transitions. So it's used all throughout jazz, all throughout popular music of the 20th century. The end. And that's what Paul's doing here. Ta-da! Turns out it's jazz!
He does it again at the other end, like this.
to love her is to need her everywhere.
Oh, isn't that lovely? That actually takes me to my next point as well. The majority of the song is in a major feel. But then in the B section it switches to a minor feel. And this is straight out of the songbook playbook. Songbook playbook.
I would hear something happen musically that I didn't know what it was, but I would think, that's nice. For instance, the changes from a minor key to a major key within a song.
You can hear it on songs like Cheek to Cheek, where the A part sounds like this.
Heaven, I'm in heaven. And then it goes into the middle. Dance with me, arms around you. The charms around you will carry me through to heaven.
And the B part sounds like that.
and you're back at the beginning. And it was like, wow, how do they do that? And I remember as a kid thinking, I love that.
And what I love about it in this song is that it creates this tension and then this perfect release when we come back to the A section. Especially when you've got that swelling of vocal coming up underneath. Oh, beautiful. It's almost angelic. Like a breath of fresh air, that is.
We're sort of moving the melody around this kind of G minor feel. And if she's beside me, I know I need minor feel. But to love her is to need her major feel. Going from that minor feel to major feel, that's what gives you that feeling of, release, deep breath, everything's gonna be okay. If only Paul McCartney. And that's another 5-1 actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are sort of fundamental techniques that are used in song composition from way, way, way back. And Paul McCartney is incorporating them in this very modern, sleek song. The end.
It comes back to where it started. A very simple trick, but kind of quite effective.
Interestingly, the Beatles also did this on the song From Me to You.
It kind of goes, if there's anything that you want, if there's anything I can do, tell me, you. So that's kind of straightforward. Then it goes, I got arms that long to hold you. It's just that. Hey?
Another sort of older quality that this song has is strong melody writing. I think that a song has a strong melody if you can sing it on its own without any backing, and it is still enjoyable and clear where the song is going. Let's get the piano correspondent to dig a little deeper on this one.
This is a song that has an incredibly strong melody. It's dynamic, it's moving all over the place. It's not static, as opposed to like... or... This one makes use of so many notes. It's never really static. And it's a melody that if you took the backing away would still be very pretty. Part of the reason for that is that the melody actually outlines the chords that it's sitting on top of. So the first chord is this, and Paul is singing that root note here. When the melody comes back in, the chord that is sitting underneath it is B minor. Those are the notes in B minor. And he's singing. So he's basically singing that chord. The next chord is C major. And his melody goes... Or let's take the B part, for example. The I want her everywhere goes over a B flat chord. And he sings... He's singing the chord, just out of order. That is a hallmark of classic songwriting. These classic songs, if the melodies are written well, will tell you what key you're in, whether it's major or minor, even what the chords are. And that's what Paul McCartney's doing in this song with his melody. Exquisite.
The last thing that jumps out here is the use of what's called chromaticism, which is when instead of playing a major or minor scale, you're playing every single note. Like this.
This is a major scale. This is a minor scale. And this is a chromatic scale, which plays all of the in-between notes.
I notice it in the B section where the guitar is doing this. So instead of playing da 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 da, it's playing all of the in-between notes. Chromaticism is a very jazz thing to do. So this is a very fast and very exaggerated example, but here's a little clip of a Charlie Parker solo that is just crammed with chromaticism. So there we go. In that sense, it's sort of a very old-fashioned song, or at least it's a song that has an old soul. This song feels like a sister song to In My Life. In my life. Because John Lennon's In My Life, contentious, I know. You can watch that episode if you want that minor drama broken down. I think that also draws from the classic songwriting traditions. That is a beautiful song, again, not because it's like nothing you've ever heard before, but because just the way that the chords are put together is very pleasing. The way that the melody joins those chords, very tidy, very skilled songwriting there. It also has a very contemporary sound because of the arrangement, which we will come back to. First though, I would like to talk about these lyrics. So let's do that. The lyrics of this song are simple, but I think they're some of my favorites of Paul McCartney's because he can be quite a private person, I think, when it comes to his lyrics. He might write perfectly lovely lyrics for songs, but it doesn't always feel like they're coming from the heart. And it can feel like he's got a bit of a guard up, like he's cautious to not let you in too much. This song is completely the opposite of that. It's vulnerable, it's open, it's stark, and that feels really authentic. When you look at a lot of the Beatles' earlier love songs, while they may be referring to a specific person, a specific subject, often they don't give you any details about those people. Like a song like Ticket to Ride is almost reporting like,
Said that living with me was bringing her down.
she'll never be free while I'm around. These are all like things that she has said. If we go back further, we've got a song like I Saw Her Standing There, which is purely physical description. She was just 17, you know what I mean? One, you can't really picture that. And two, the singer doesn't really know anything about this person. This song very intimately refers to a specific person. Like in this line, this woman is... And Paul is... On this song, Paul clearly knows this woman. He's familiar with these very specific mannerisms, like the wave of her hand. He has looked in her eyes. He is watching her eyes and hoping that he's always there. I think that's beautiful. There is a gorgeous intimacy about that. It's almost the sort of domestic mundanity of it. This is a song about the little things, about the specific details. And then there's this sort of depth of his desire, and lines like this.
I want her everywhere.
I want her everywhere. Want, desire. That's a different kind of desire from the way she looked was way beyond compare. Oof, what a hottie. It's very different from to love her is to need her everywhere. Watching her eyes and hoping I'm always there. That feels a lot more profound. That is a different kind of want, desire, need. And in a way it takes a lot of guts to be that honest, that candid, sharing those moments of your relationship with other people. So I suppose what this all boils down to is something I said a little bit earlier. Authenticity. This is a relatable experience to anybody who's ever had that kind of intimacy with their romantic partner. It's simple, but it's honest, it's intimate, it's authentic. And I think Paul has done that so well on this track. Which brings us to our last point, arrangement. It feels almost like a contradiction to be talking about the arrangement because if we look at the last of Paul's songs that we explored on this series, Eleanor Rigby, that's a song that has been immaculately arranged. Like there's a string part that was written specifically for that song. With this song, by contrast, they have taken everything that makes up the Beatles and stripped it back to its barest components. There's hardly any drum. There's very little percussion. The guitar is fairly sparse. The bass is very quiet in the mix, although Paul does play some tasty little bass flourishes, some of which the bass correspondent will show you now.
You know, there's the one that goes... And then there's this one as well. It's very simple, but it adds a delightful little point of interest.
Each one believing that love never.
Which means that what we're left with is Paul McCartney's beautiful melody and a tight, intimate backing vocal. It took approximately 3 days to record this song, and most of those 3 days were dedicated to crafting that backing vocal and perfecting it. In that sense, the song is sort of like a distillation of why the Beatles are so impressive vocally. And again, I do think that it harkens back to that sort of older songwriting tradition. It almost smacks of like barbershop or something like the Ink Spots.
I find
McCartney said that the backing vocals were inspired by the Beach Boys. But of course Brian Wilson was inspired by those same sort of barbershop-y traditions like the Four Freshmen.
It's a blue world alone.
So it's all kind of coming back to that. And I suppose it makes sense because we all soak up whatever it is that we're listening to when we're young. It forms our musical foundations. And if you're a songwriter, it makes sense that that's going to bleed through into your work. In fact, that's one of my favorite things about songwriting. It's like your own personal musical footprint. You never know exactly what's going to come out when you're writing music. Sometimes it's something entirely unexpected, something you haven't listened to in years. Sometimes your brain just farts them out. Maybe that was a poor choice of words. It sort of makes crass something that I think is almost sacrosanct. But I think it made the point well enough. The last thing I really love about the arrangement of this piece is that although it's very simple and very short, there is a slight build so that the second half isn't just an exact repetition of the beginning. For example, the bass part that we mentioned earlier does get busier. Those tasty flourishes that the bass correspondent showed us earlier come later and later in the song, and they become increasingly complicated as the song progresses. Or they introduce a harmony on the last Love Never Dies. Beautiful descending harmony there.
Love never dies, watching her eyes.
Very simple detail. Very pretty. Before I talked about how the song has an old-fashioned feel to it, but I think it's the instrumentation that modernizes it. Specifically, I think it's that they still have that contemporary rock and roll layout. As a group, you've got your guitars, your bass, your drums, but it's blended with these old-fashioned sort of barbershop-y harmonies and a beautiful, gentle, sweet melody sung over very tidy, very satisfying chords. And there we have it. It's so simple, this song. So bare, almost. But Paul McCartney clearly is a bit of a sponge and can take in all of these different influences that he's listening to. Quite simply, I think Paul McCartney just does everything right on this one. And it's not the kind of everything right that you can follow to the letter. That's the magic of it. It doesn't sound like any other song particularly. It stands up in its own right, but it's also comfortably familiar when you listen to it. Just songwriting perfection. That's it for me. If you enjoyed this episode, or you would like to support me, or the Storytime correspondent, or the piano correspondent, or the guitar correspondent, or the bass correspondent, I'll leave a link in the description for my Buy Me a Coffee page, where you are most welcome to make a donation, but you are not obliged. No pressure, friends. By the way, I'm wearing this shirt today because Abby from Vinyl Monday and I did a fun like crossover Q&A episode, which you can watch here. And a number of you asked about an XTC episode. I just want to say, even if it doesn't happen immediately, there are so many XTC episodes that are coming up because this is one of my favorite bands. So I hope that eases your fears. They are coming. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you here next week. Have a great weekend! I've just found a piece of paper on the floor that I've cut out at some point in the past that says, "A blooming crystal headpiece is decoration enough." So there's a little affirmation for those of you wearing blooming crystal headpieces out there. Okay, so we're in the B part of the song. We have this little chromatic line. And then the guitar plays a harmony over the vocal. But to love her is to need her everywhere. These really are stunning chords.